we will move on to our next presentation. This one comes from Stephen Gonzalez, who is a postdoctoral fellow in general education at the University of Southern California. His primary research area is agricultural literature in the Roman Empire, which he examines from a materialist perspective. His work necessarily intersects with slavery, social and cultural history, and Roman intellectual culture. He is also interested in the reception of Roman agricultural literature in the Americas and the American South. His affinity for metal music grew from his love for guitar playing. Although he no longer plays in any groups, he still enjoys playing various genres such as country, rock, blues, and, of course, metal. He is currently based in Los Angeles County, and he comes to us today with a presentation titled Metal, Myth, and Virtuosity. Take it away, Stephen.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, everyone can hear me. Okay, I'm here. And to start off, sorry, I just had to do that because I don't think I'd ever be able to start a presentation like that ever. Okay, so the title of my talk is Metal, Myth, and Virtuosity, the Icarus Myth in Iron Maiden and Yngwie Malmsteen. As I shall show today, the Icarus myth originates in the Greco-Roman classical tradition, but is by no means bound to this context. The myth was first referenced in fragments from Euripides' Cretan Women, and in this early version, King Minos wishes to punish, pacify, and Daedalus, the one for her perverse lust for the bull, and the other for creating a contraption for her to consummate this lust. Daedalus is imprisoned, and upon being released by Pacify, gives his son Icarus waxen wings. After flying too high, Icarus's wings melt and he falls to his death. The sea is then named after the boy. In Virgil, the story is represented on the doors of a great temple built by Daedalus himself in the first region in which he landed. After fleeing King Minos' kingdom. The temple doors depict some additional details surrounding the myth, the oppressive nature of Minos' rule, the requirement that the Athenians pay a tribute of 7 use to the Cretan kingdom, and the monster created by Pacify's union with the bull, and Daedalus' role in aiding Theseus out of the labyrinth with the help of a thread, because he felt pity on the princess Ariadne. But the ekphrasis abruptly stops with a description of Daedalus' failure. The artist-inventor tried, but failed to depict the story of his son. And there is a handout, and this is one of the first passages on it. You would have shared largely in such a work, Icarus, if grief had allowed. Twice he attempted to fashion your fate in gold. Twice your father's hands fell. The story is alluded to, but is not fully narrated. The episode prefigures Aeneas' journey to the underworld and the subsequent knowledge of empire he acquires from his father Anchises, encapsulated in this other passage on the handout. Remember, Roman, it is for you to rule the nations with your power. That will be your skill, to crown peace with law, to spare the conquered and subdue the proud. These promising words, when connected to Daedalus' failed skill, contain a strong dose of pessimism for the civilizing effects of empire. Just as Daedalus fails to transmit the knowledge and skill required for flight to his son, Anchises' transfer of the key precepts of empire will fail to be received by Aeneas. Ovid's version of the myth is perhaps the most recognizable today. In the Metamorphoses, Icarus appears as a young boy who's enthralled with his father's work, unaware that it would lead to his downfall. When the wings are complete, Daedalus teaches his son how to fly, warning him to take the middle course. And this is also on your handout. I warn you, Icarus, to fly in the middle, lest if you go too low, the water may weigh down your wings, and if you go too high, the fire may burn them. Fly between the two, and I bid you not to shape your course by Bootes or Helice, or the drawn sword of Orion, but fly where I shall lead. Icarus's fate is then soon realized when he flies too high. When the father finally sees his son's wings in the ocean, he realizes he has lost his son, he curses his skill, and buries the son in a tomb. In a strange epilogue to the story of Icarus, Daedalus' sister sends her boy to learn from his artist uncle. The boy, Poetics, had great potential, recognized by Ovid as having, quote, an inventive turn of mind. Taking his cues from nature, upon observing a fish's backbone, he invents the first saw. Then, by sticking two pieces of iron together with a joint, he created the compass. But Daedalus, due to envy, hurled the boy from the temple of Minerva. Taking pity on him, Minerva turned the boy into the partridge, who, in his new form, never flies high, nor nests in trees, but flutters close to the ground, because it seems that the bird remembers and is fearful of all high places. In both Ovid and Virgil, the myth of Daedalus and Icarus is significant for each author's poetic program. It has been argued that in both Virgil and Ovid, the story of Icarus occupies the midpoint of each work. In Virgil, the myth mediates between past and present, old and new. Additionally, scholars have recognized that it contains metapoetic significance, where the flight is emblematic of the artistic hubris of the poet who aspires to the high genre of epic or tries to extend beyond the bounds of lyric. In the Met, Ovid uses the myth as a means of elaborating upon the intricacies of his poetics, differentiating himself from his poetic predecessors. Where Virgil's Daedalus fails to represent Icarus' story in the doors of the temple, Ovid provides a full account of Daedalus' myth. Icarus' infamous decision to disobey his father speaks to his boldness, which allows him to obtain a semblance of immortality. His name is given to the sea, and through his naming, he lives on. Icarus' analog, Perdex, though he displays his great potential, he is doomed in his new form to occupy the middle way, forever an emblem of mediocrity. And although there was no tension and antagonism in Daedalus' initial advice to Icarus, the reappearance of this advice, realized in the figure of Perdex, is presented as a kind of artistic sabotage. In other words, shunning artistic boldness dooms the artist to a perpetual inability to achieve notoriety. Ovid thus uses the myth to reflect upon artistic potential, inborn talent, and the boundaries of genre. I argue in this paper that the two metal artists I discussed today clearly utilize the myth of Icarus for their own reflections on the boundaries of metal, using the myth as a means of reflecting on their own contributions to this genre. Now I'll talk about Iron Maiden and just take in this lovely album cover art. The opening lyrics of the Flight of Icarus are potentially a break from the Ovidian version, or perhaps a blending of its various parts. Their narrative embraces minimalism, but is exceedingly effective. The first verse introduces an unnamed old man standing on a hill in the hours of the early morning. The description of the old man, especially his eyes, quote, madman in his gaze, mean we can most likely identify him as Daedalus, especially since artists are typically associated with genius or madness. In the next verse, the song introduces Icarus already wearing his wings. Through Bruce Dickinson's soaring voice, Icarus proclaims, "In the name of God my Father, I'll fly." The defining elements of the maiden version of the myth is present in the song's final verse. This is on your handout. His eyes seem so glazed as he flies on the wings of a dream. Now he knows his father betrayed. Now his wings turn to ashes his grave. The antagonism between father and son here is undeniable. It is reminiscent of Daedalus' interactions with his nephew, Perdex. Here I suggest that meditations on metapoetic expression are exchanged for generic reflections. Both versions of the myth hinge on generational strife, a problem inherent in Greco-Roman mythology. In Hesiod's Theogony, a constant string of usurpations take place in the cosmic order until Zeus puts a stop to the intergenerational violence. The utilization of the Icarus myth, combined with elements from the poetics myth, suggests that generic tensions might underline Maiden's version of the myth. I'm going to now talk about the context out of which Iron Maiden arises. Sounds editor Alan Lewis and journalist Jeff Barton are often credited for the coining of the term, the new wave of British heavy metal. This hybrid term referred to the fusion of heavy metal from the 70s with the intensity of punk rock. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing a Rancid shirt, so do forgive me. It was used to describe the reemergence of metal bands during the late 70s and was meant to promote a self-consciously new era in music. Quote, it appropriated the capacity of new wave to embody this cutting edge and applied it to a genre which seemed to be anything but state of the art at the moment. Heavy metal historian Ian Christ summed up the period as a culmination of a decade of development on the British scene. He claims Black Sabbath had introduced heavy metal, Judas Priest gave it flash, and Motorhead fortified it with true grit. So equipped, heavy metal swallowed punk and pressed forward. The Saturnian myth of swallowing is noteworthy here. The act of swallowing was the method by which Kronos, or Saturn, suppressed his children. Other characterizations of the genre note the role of punk. The new wave of British heavy metal was long hair, adopting the do-it-yourself attitude and values of the punk movement that had so dominated at grassroots levels the previous years. Escapist themes were prominent in the new genre, including fantasy, horror, and the fast slice of a rock and roll lifestyle. I would light a lighter for Pazuzu due to Nair's talk. One aspect of this genre, which I would like to emphasize, is its increasing focus on virtuosity. The point is neatly encapsulated in a sound journalist's words after interviewing a kid who had attended a Scorpions concert and was asked if the band's age troubled him. The interviewee expressed his expectation that experience was necessary for proficiency on the guitar. This is a quote from the kid. No, I play guitar and I probably won't be any good till I'm 30. The journalist wrote about the encounter, and maybe read this to yourself in a Werner Herzog voice. There does not speak a Clash fan. The split between the old and the new worlds of rock defined in one little sentence. Early Iron Maiden fused this more serious musicianship in distinction to and alongside the intensity of punk, especially in its early years under singer Paul Di'Anno. This more studied musicianship also meant a willingness to depart from blues-inspired guitar work to the incorporation of more exotic-sounding diatonic scales with multiple soloists. The innovation also speaks to the tendency toward extremes within metal. Alongside the pursuit of increasing heaviness and distortion, there was an increasing attention to virtuosity. Thus, the Icarus story of Iron Maiden dramatizes the anxieties over the band's various generic influences from metal to punk and stages the band's struggle to differentiate themselves from these influences. Virtuosity and technical prowess were widely recognized as a means of distinguishing oneself from one's peers. A standout guitar player had long been an important element in a successful rock band. This was true of the British invasion with players like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page, and in the US with Jimi Hendrix. In metal specifically, Tony Iommi, though most well known for his riffing ability, was no slouch in composing impressive instrumental interludes and solos. Deep Purple's Ritchie Blackmore was another player widely recognized for his high-level playing. The boundaries of rock virtuosity were pushed beyond their limits with the release of Van Halen's first album. Randy Rhoads, closely following Van Halen, is an important predecessor for the next artist I will discuss, as he incorporated classical elements into his solos alongside fiery, tapped arpeggios and wicked legato runs. But a new level of virtuosity was realized in Yngwie Malmsteen with the release of his first solo album, Rising Force. His trademark style of playing centered on lightning-fast runs, blazing arpeggios, extensive sweep-picking passages, and heavy utilization of the harmonic minor scale. This really gives his music a classical flavoring. The desire to transcend the technical skills of his predecessors is expressed in the names of his songs: Rising Force, Far Beyond the Sun, Faster Than the Speed of Light are some select songs which really illustrate Malmsteen's self-conscious construction of identity predicated upon virtuosity. This is clear in the song Icarus Dream Suite Opus 4. Here, Daedalian artistry is connected explicitly to virtuosity. This connection is also visible in Malmsteen's cited influences, which include most of the guitar players mentioned above. But he also overtly embraced classical artists, notably Bach, Verdi, and Niccolò Paganini, a virtuoso Italian violin player. The main melodic theme in the song follows Adagio in G minor, a widely used melody, think The Doors, with an interesting background story. The song is indicative of Malmsteen's ability to differentiate himself from the droves of other guitarists whose playing utilized a strong blues rock sound. The song's melodic theme is peppered with various blistering runs. The harmonic minor scale, so dominant in much of Malmsteen's playing, shines throughout. The bridge incorporates pedal tone licks, a familiar feature of Baroque music and a staple of Malmsteen's style. In short, the song is that fusion of classical and heavy metal which Malmsteen had a heavy hand in developing. It was Malmsteen's technical proficiency and flash that really helped make neoclassical a distinct genre, along with other players such as Tony McAlpine, Jason Becker, Marty Friedman, Paul Gilbert, and bands such as Cacophony and Symphony X. To summarize, thus far I've argued that the myth of Daedalus expressed the frustrations of the artist in the quest for differentiation. For Iron Maiden, this meant blending metal and punk and the embrace of more technical elements in metal. In this context, the myth expressed the antagonism between old and new, young and old, father and son, and the genres which comprise the new wave of British heavy metal. For Malmsteen, although we are deprived of any details of the myth's narrative, its invocation signaled the guitarist's achievement of virtuosity at a level which has arguably yet to be surpassed. The guitar served as a vehicle for this virtuosity. I'm now going to talk about innovation and virtuosity in Greek myth. The context of Greek music, actually. The context of Greek myth provided these artists with a means of communicating their embrace of virtuosity in musical innovation. In the context of Greek music, ancient Greek music, these two concepts were closely related. Innovation in music was closely associated with virtuosity, conceived as a utilization of different scales, chords, and technical changes to the very form of the instrument itself. In ancient Greece, this meant the incorporation of additional songs for kithara-type instruments. These are stringed instruments, or additional stops for the alloy, a double reed instrument, probably closest to the oboe. Of course, the addition of more strings and more stops meant the incorporation of a broader range of scales. Various developments of this sort appeared throughout the history of ancient Greek music. The rise of the new music in ancient Greece in the late 5th century to the 4th century is one example. In the descriptions of the new music, the new patterns of song were characterized by a departure from the scales followed in the old style and by the use of bends, a term which is hypothesized to mean a departure from the proper tunings of the forefathers. Not exactly the bends that we know of today, probably more based on just the tunings of the instrument. Another classical author, Pseudo-Plutarch, says that the older style of music was characterized by limitations to a smaller number of notes, and claims that simplicity and dignity in music began to be considered as old-fashioned. Ion of Chios wrote an epigram about the lyre, telling of a past time when 7 notes were the norm, as opposed to the 11 featured on his instrument. Of the many musicians mentioned in Pherocrides' comic play Chiron, which survives only in fragments, Melanippes is identified as the first to misuse the personified character of music, who appears as a high-class hetaira who takes on new lovers. The composer is noted for replacing antistrophes with musical interludes, allowing for more expressive singing and instrumentation. Phrynis, another musician mentioned in the Chiron, is noted for increasing the number of kithara strings from 7 to 9. He experimented with combining dactylic hexameter with free-form passages. Pherecrates notes his facility with the instrument through the personified character of music. And this is on your handout. Phrynis, hurling a kind of personal whirlwind at me, has ravaged me completely with his bending and twisting, having up to 5 harmoniae in a dozen strings. The phrase "in a dozen strings" is a translation here hypothesized by West and is a description typical of the new musicians. The first part of the passage details the utilization of many notes as well as modulations between different scales. Another notable musician, Timotheus, is emblematic of innovation and technical prowess. He proudly proclaimed in one fragment, "I sing not the old songs, my new ones are better, away with the muse of old." And you can imagine the music accompanying that was pretty elaborate. His music is described as intricate as an anthill, utilizing various tunings, extra high notes, and filled up with wrigglies. This is what West translated as. The style of music that the musicians of the new music composed were called gnomes, or nomoi in Greek. These songs, according to Pseudo-Plutarch, received this name because in traditional music there was no modulation of harmonies or rhythms. Thus the songs were called nomoi, a play on the Greek word for laws. The old music was synonymous with Pindar and Simonides. According to Plato, the new music was morally harmful. He cites some songs which may have been references to Timotheus' music. It seems that the primary context of music was for the purpose of honoring the gods or educating the youth. To these conservative viewpoints, the new music represented catering to popular tastes. For this reason, philosophers like Plato and Aristophanes disparaged the new musicians greatly. West notes that similar criticisms were levied against Beethoven and other renowned composers. The new musicians, moreover, were associated with poor taste. I think this is on your handout, but Crexus, Timotheus, Philoxenus, and the composers of that time had a streak of coarseness in them and were fond of novelty, aiming at the matter that is now called popular and mercenary. Thus, restriction to a few notes and simplicity and grandeur in music has come to be quite obsolete, end quote. However, the bar for what was considered in fashion was dynamic. Soon, someone like Phrynis, who we looked at earlier, was considered to be a classic in the company of Terpander, a more established old musician. This restraint, according to Pseudo-Plutarch, was not due to ignorance. Terpander and Olympus, an older generation of musicians, did not need a multiplicity of notes and rhythms for their distinctive sound. A similar debate occurs with guitar players today, where some embrace a more relaxed musical vocabulary, actively shunning a great deal of notes for stylistic reasons, versus others who employ as many notes as possible. Malmsteen has a phrase, "more is more." An example is B.B. King talking about how some players use too many notes, and B.B. is a perfect example of someone who could express much with only a small number of notes, instead using repetition and varied phrasing, creating predictability and familiarity, and giving his instrument a vocal quality, making it sing. Innovation in music then, because it challenges convention, was considered dangerous. These feelings explain the suspicions with which some treated the innovator, who was frowned upon and seen as a threat to stability. Recall the warnings against new kinds of music in Plato's Republic, where it is noted that the music and literature of the state cannot be changed without major political changes. This is also the appeal of the artist or the expert. Daedalus, a figure connected with an otherworldly power because he was creator of the labyrinth, a structure which in the Aeneid straddles the boundary between life and death. To solve the labyrinth was to be able to successfully navigate these domains, making him a figure worthy of awe. Fear and suspicion were behind the various monikers of Niccolo Paganini, who was called at different points in his career sorcerer, wizard, magician, devil spawn, epithets which indicate that his skill aroused suspicion as to its source. Virtuosity served as a vehicle for others to project their own fears onto, whether religious or political. The supernatural became a means of explaining the spectacular virtuosity that some musicians attained, as in Robert Johnson's Deal with the Devil. I do have some. Oh, I had this slide on Greek music. You could see the kithara and the alloy in the bottom right. This trope is central to the Tenacious D film, where the band achieves success by acquiring the Pick of Destiny, a talisman used by all rock legends, which first came about when a dark wizard summons Satan and battles him to gain his powers. During this battle, Satan's tooth is chipped when a blacksmith comes to the wizard's rescue, thereby creating the Pick of Destiny. And in another film, a duel over one's character's soul is the central dramatic action between Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid, and Steve Vai in the film Crossroads. To conclude, the Daedalus myth in the classical tradition straddled the line between the old and the new, becoming a means by which Roman poets drew distinctions between their predecessors and themselves. Iron Maiden and Malmsteen used the myth for similar purposes, pushing the boundaries of metal in the process by the mixing of genres and increasing levels of virtuosity. In the context of ancient Greece, similar contests occurred. Virtuosity as innovation was viewed with suspicion for its destabilizing qualities. Nevertheless, it became a means of differentiation for these ancient musicians. And that's it.